I have a question that I've had for a couple decades now. It's a question about death, and I'll preface it with just so you can understand the depth of how I'd really like some insight into this. Settle. 26 years ago, my second son died. He was just 24 weeks gestation, so he was premature. Anyways, so from that day, I've been searching, trying to get a sense of what did he experience, what is death. And I understand that at death, the finite mind and body dissolve, and we merge, or we return, or what's left is the infinite consciousness. But that all seems so... I was wondering if there's anything else you could tell me about the actual experience of that. What is that? What happened? What did he feel? What did he experience? He got some answers.
I can't tell you what he experienced. Some rudimentary sensations and perceptions. But as for what this experience means for you, when each of our minds is, as we've talked earlier this week, is like a temporary localization of infinite consciousness or God's self-aware being. And when we look at that localization from the outside, it appears as a body. So your son was a localization, a temporary localization of God's infinite being, made only of God's infinite being, but a temporary localization of that being which, from your perspective, appeared as his little body. And then when that when God's infinite being delocalizes, the mind disintegrates and goes back, as it were, to the broader medium of God's mind from which it emerged. And that, from the outside, that is from your perspective, that appears as the death of the body. From the inside, it doesn't appear as the death of the body, it appears as the disappearance of a network of sensations and perceptions. Because from the inside, we don't experience the body as it appears to be from the outside. If this were the first experience I had ever had, and I were to describe my experience to you, I wouldn't mention a body. I have no knowledge or experience of my body at the moment. 95% of my experience is world, and mixed in with that there are a few floating sensations and thoughts. So, whereas from your perspective, I look as if I have a very clearly defined body. But the sensations that I am experiencing are far from clearly defined. They are just nebulous, mostly transparent sensations floating around. So from the inside, the experience is not the death of a body. It is the gradual disappearance of sensations and perceptions. From the outside, that appears as the death of the body. But so what was this brief intervention in your life? I would suggest that God's infinite being just briefly took form, localized itself in a temporary form with a temporary name, just enough time for you to have this connection, this in other words, just enough time for you to be touched by God's presence. And although he was taken away from you, his form, your infant's form was taken away from you very quickly. Your time with him was just enough time for this little localization of God's presence to touch you, to embrace you, and then to leave. And the reason I would suggest that now, 20 or so years later, you are still wondering about it and still obviously deeply touched by it is because you were deeply touched by this gesture from God, and you were deeply touched by that we call that love. You deeply felt the love in this relationship, and although the relationship didn't last long, the love is obviously still present. If it wasn't present, it would not be present now. You wouldn't be wondering about it. You were obviously deeply touched by it. And I would suggest that was the deep meaning of the experience, this brief, like a blessing from God that has deeply opened your heart to love.
It was the beginning of my journey, if you want to call it that, yeah. And to hear. But
it was
in the infinite, there's no experience in the infinite, so how is there you say that there's peace and happiness that's the nature of consciousness? So if you're
yes, but when I say peace and happiness, this is one of the downside of using the words peace and happiness. But I don't know another word, because I don't mean by happiness a kind of positive, gleeful, exuberant state of mind. It's more like, it's why I sometimes use the word fulfillment or contentment. It's the absence of the sense of lack. So it's not a happy state of the mind. Happy states of the mind come and go. It's the absence of any resistance whatsoever. The absence of lack. Lack is what the sense of lack is what we call suffering, and the absence of lack is what we call happiness. So happiness is a positive word that is used to describe the absence of suffering. It would be more accurate to describe it as the absence of any problem or the absence of suffering. But the common name for that is ease or peace or fulfillment or contentment. It doesn't always have to wear a big smile.
But do you feel that in the transition, when you're actually making the transition? Or since there's no small I, there's really no feeling to it?
But you know what I mean by the experience of peace.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. So
Is there anything you like more in your life than peace?
No, I'll go with peace. Peace is good.
Or fulfillment?
Yeah.
There's nothing you want more than that. In fact, everything you desire only because of the peace you hope that it will bring you. So it's really peace that you love more than anything else, peace or fulfillment or happiness. I don't mean by happiness a gleeful state, just this quiet happiness, fulfillment.
So you feel that's what you transition into when you die?
What I would suggest is that is what we essentially are. That is there all the time. It's like the blue sky. And that thoughts, feelings, etc. are like the clouds. So in numerous times during the day and during our lives, for everybody, not just people interested in these matters, the clouds, so to speak, part, and the blue sky shines through. That is the common experience of peace or happiness. So when all the clouds evaporate, that is, all objective experience evaporates, our thoughts, our feelings, our sensations, our perception. When all that is gone, all that is left is the blue sky, the inherently peaceful presence of awareness. But that no longer has a form, because there are no clouds. It's formless. It's God's infinite being. And we don't cease to become that when we are born. But what we are is simply a temporary localization or limitation of that. But the self that we really are always remains that infinite sky of awareness, albeit in a limited form. So when we die, we lose our limitations, and we don't return to God's infinite being, but God's infinite being is what is revealed when all its temporary limitations have been dissolved. So in a way, God gave you a very poignant and difficult sadhana. He kissed you briefly. Was it 26 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
He kissed you briefly 26 years ago, and then went back into hiding. But that kiss was enough to initiate this desire in you for God's presence. And it has troubled you ever since. Ever since you have been looking for whatever it was that touched you all those years ago. And as you say, it initiated your search for God, for peace, for enlightenment, whatever name you give it. But in this conversation, God is the appropriate name. And you have, that's what's brought you here. That's what has been the guiding, from what I understand from what you said. It's this search for God's presence has been the guiding light of your life ever since. So although the brief presence of your son in your life and then his death was obviously extremely poignant and painful, at the same time it was the way in which God planted a seed of his love in your heart and initiated your return to him.
Thank you.